What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors sits down for what should be a routine interview, only to find himself face to face with a host who seems determined to turn every question into a personal attack? Well, buckle up because what you're about to witness is one of the most explosive television moments in recent memory. Samuel L. Jackson, known for his commanding presence and no-nonsense attitude, walked onto the View set expecting a professional conversation about his latest projects. Instead, he found himself in a verbal battleground with Joy Behar that would ultimately lead to security being called and Jackson being escorted off the set. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think about celebrity interviews gone wrong. Trust me, you're going to want to be subscribed for what comes next. The morning started like any other on The View. The familiar theme music played as the camera panned across the iconic table where Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, Sarah Haynes, Alyssa, Farrah Griffin, and Sunny Hostin took their seats. The studio audience was buzzing with anticipation, knowing they were about to witness an interview with Samuel L. Jackson, the legendary actor whose career spans decades and includes some of the most memorable characters in cinema history. Whoopi, serving as the show's moderator, began with her usual warm welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, we are thrilled to have with us today the incomparable Samuel L. Jackson. His new film just hit theaters, and we're excited to talk with him about his incredible career and what's next. Jackson walked onto the set with his characteristic confidence, dressed in a sharp black suit that commanded respect. He greeted each host with a firm handshake and a genuine smile, taking his seat across from the panel. The audience erupted in applause, clearly excited to see the Hollywood icon in person. "Thank you for having me," Jackson said, his deep voice carrying across the studio. "It's always a pleasure to be here with you ladies." Sarah Haynes jumped in first with what seemed like a softball question. "Samuel, your new film deals with some heavy themes about justice and redemption. What drew you to this particular role?" Jackson leaned back slightly, clearly comfortable with the question. "You know, Sarah, at this stage in my career, I'm drawn to stories that have something meaningful to say. This character represents someone who's made mistakes, but is trying to make things right. I think we can all relate to that journey of redemption." Sunny Hostin nodded approvingly. "That's beautiful, Samuel. Your body of work has always seemed to gravitate toward characters with depth and complexity. Do you consciously choose roles that challenge societal norms?" "Absolutely," Jackson replied. "I've been fortunate enough in my career to work with directors who aren't afraid to tackle difficult subjects, whether it's racial injustice, political corruption, or personal redemption. I believe cinema has the power to start important conversations." Alyssa Farrah Griffin chimed in with enthusiasm. "Speaking of important conversations, your speech at the recent awards ceremony really resonated with people. You talked about the responsibility that comes with having a platform. Can you elaborate on that?" Jackson's eyes lit up. "When you're in the public eye, whether you like it or not, people listen to what you say. I've learned that with that privilege comes the responsibility to use your voice thoughtfully. I don't take that lightly." The conversation was flowing smoothly, with each host asking thoughtful questions that allowed Jackson to showcase his intelligence and passion for his craft. The audience was engaged, hanging on every word from the celebrated actor. Then Joy Behar leaned forward, and the entire atmosphere in the studio seemed to shift. There was something in her expression, a slight smirk, that suggested she was about to take the conversation in a completely different direction. "Samuel," she began, her voice carrying a tone that was noticeably different from her colleagues, "I have to ask you about some of the controversial statements you've made in recent interviews. Don't you think celebrities should stay out of politics altogether?" Jackson's expression remained calm, but there was a slight tightening around his eyes that suggested he was choosing his words carefully. "Joy, I believe every American citizen has the right to express their political views. Being an actor doesn't strip me of my constitutional rights. But don't you think," Behar pressed, leaning forward even more aggressively, "that when celebrities get political, it just alienates half their audience? I mean, some people might say you're being irresponsible with your platform." The other hosts exchanged glances, clearly sensing that Joy was steering the interview into potentially dangerous territory. Whoopi cleared her throat, perhaps trying to redirect the conversation, But Joy wasn't finished. I'm just saying, she continued, maybe actors should stick to acting instead of lecturing the rest of us about how to think. Jackson's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. Joy, with all due respect, I've been voting and caring about this country long before I became famous. My political views aren't a publicity stunt. They're based on my experiences as an American citizen. Oh, please, Joy scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. Half the time celebrities don't even know what they're talking about. You read a few headlines, and suddenly you're a political expert. The studio fell silent. Even the audience seemed to sense that something was going very wrong. Sarah Haynes looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with her notes, while Sunny Hostin's expression showed clear disapproval of where Joy was taking the conversation. Jackson sat back in his chair, and for a moment, his famous intensity was clearly visible. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge. Joy, I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish here, but if you brought me on this show just to insult my intelligence, maybe we should end this conversation right now. I'm not insulting your intelligence, Joy replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. I'm just asking if you think it's appropriate for someone in your position to be so vocal about politics. Some people might call it hypocritical. Hypocritical? Jackson repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. How exactly is it hypocritical for me to exercise my right as an American citizen to speak about issues that affect my community and my country? Whoopi tried to intervene. Maybe we should move on to talking about Samuel's upcoming projects. But Joy wasn't backing down. I'm just saying, Samuel, that maybe instead of complaining about the system, you should be grateful for the opportunities this country has given you. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jackson's eyes narrowed, and the temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. The other hosts looked mortified, clearly recognizing that Joy had just crossed a line that should never have been crossed. Jackson's response was swift and devastating. He leaned forward, his voice taking on the commanding tone that had made him one of Hollywood's most respected actors. Grateful? Let me tell you something, Joy. I've worked my entire life for everything I've achieved. I didn't get handouts, I didn't get special treatment, and I certainly didn't get where I am by staying quiet about injustice. The studio was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop as Jackson continued, his words measured but powerful. You want to talk about gratitude? I'm grateful for the opportunities I've earned through decades of hard work and dedication. But I'm not going to sit here and be lectured about staying in my lane by someone who built their career on having opinions about everything. Joy's face flushed red, clearly not expecting Jackson to push back so forcefully. Now wait just a minute, she began, but Jackson wasn't finished. No, you wait a minute, he said, his voice rising slightly but still controlled. You brought me here under the pretense of discussing my work, but what you really wanted was to put me in my place. Well, let me make something crystal clear. I don't need to justify my right to speak about issues that matter to me. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to crawl under the table, while Alyssa Farah Griffin was frantically scribbling notes, probably trying to figure out how to salvage the interview. Sunny Hostin's expression showed a mixture of admiration for Jackson's response and frustration with her colleague's behavior. Whoopi tried once again to restore order. Samuel, we appreciate your passion and Joy. Maybe we should focus on the positive aspects of Samuel's career and his new film. But Joy, perhaps feeling cornered and embarrassed, doubled down on her attack. I think I have the right to ask tough questions. This is The View, not some promotional puff piece. If you can't handle legitimate criticism, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Jackson's laugh was cold and humorless. Legitimate criticism? Is that what you call this? Joy, you haven't asked me a single substantive question about my political views or my reasoning behind them. You've just made assumptions and attacked me personally. I have not attacked you personally, Joy protested, though her defensive tone suggested otherwise. Really? Jackson raised an eyebrow, his expression incredulous. You've questioned my intelligence, dismissed my life experiences, and suggested I should be grateful and quiet. If that's not personal, I'd hate to see what you consider an actual attack. The audience was completely captivated by this unprecedented display of tension. Some viewers were leaning forward in their seats, while others looked visibly uncomfortable, watching this professional relationship implode in real time. Sunny Hostin finally spoke up, clearly trying to defuse the situation. Samuel, I think what Joy might be trying to say is that there's always been debate about the role of celebrities in political discourse. But I personally believe that your voice and your perspective are valuable contributions to important conversations. Jackson nodded gratefully towards Sonny. Thank you, Sonny. And you're absolutely right. There should be debate about these issues. But debate requires good faith discussion, not personal attacks disguised as journalism. Joy's face was now bright red, and she seemed to be struggling to maintain her composure. I am not attacking you, Samuel. I'm asking legitimate questions that many Americans are thinking. Are you? Jackson's voice was dangerously calm. Because it seems to me like you're more interested in scoring points than having an actual conversation. You want to know what many Americans are thinking? They're thinking that interviewers should do their homework before ambushing their guests. The tension in the studio was palpable. Camera operators were zooming in on the confrontation, recognizing that they were capturing television gold. The other hosts were clearly struggling with how to proceed, caught between supporting their colleague and acknowledging that she had created this mess. Alyssa Farah Griffin attempted to change the subject. Samuel, your new film features an ensemble cast. Can you tell us about working with such talented actors? But Joy wasn't ready to let it go. I'm not finished with my questions, she said sharply, cutting off Alyssa. Samuel, you've made it clear that you think celebrities should be political. But don't you think there's a difference between having opinions and actively campaigning for candidates? Jackson's patience was clearly wearing thin. Joy, I've never hidden my political views, and I've never apologized for them. If you have a specific issue with something I've said or done, then let's discuss it like adults. But this vague insinuation that I'm somehow overstepping my bounds is insulting. I'm not making insinuations, Joy shot back. I'm asking direct questions about your political activism. Some people might say you're using your fame to push an agenda. And some people might say you're using your platform to silence voices you disagree with. Jackson replied without missing a beat. But I wouldn't make that accusation without evidence. The verbal sparring was reaching a fever pitch. Whoopi was frantically looking at her producers off camera, clearly seeking guidance on how to handle the situation. The audience was completely silent, mesmerized by the intellectual battle playing out before them. Joy, perhaps realizing she was losing the argument, decided to escalate further. You know what, Samuel? I think you're being deliberately obtuse. I'm trying to have a reasonable discussion about the responsibility that comes with celebrity, and you're turning it into a personal attack. Jackson's expression shifted from controlled anger to something approaching amazement. I'm being deliberately obtuse? Joy, you started this conversation by questioning my intelligence, dismissing my political views, and suggesting I should be grateful and quiet. Now you're accusing me of making it personal. I never said you should be quiet, Joy protested, though her earlier comments suggested otherwise. You literally said that actors should stick to acting instead of lecturing people about how to think, Jackson reminded her, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had clearly been paying attention to every word. Sarah Haynes finally found her voice. Maybe we're all getting a little heated here. Samuel, we really do appreciate you being here, and we'd love to hear more about your new project. But Jackson was no longer interested in discussing his film. He was focused entirely on Joy, who had created this confrontation and now seemed determined to see it through to its ugly conclusion. You know what, Sarah? Jackson said, never taking his eyes off Joy. I came here thinking I was going to have a professional conversation about my work and my career. Instead, I've been subjected to what can only be described as a hostile interrogation by someone who clearly had an agenda from the moment I walked onto this set. Joy's response was immediate and defensive. That is completely unfair. I'm doing my job as a journalist, asking the tough questions that need to be asked. Journalist. Jackson's voice carried a note of disbelief. Joy, you're not a journalist. You're a talk show host who apparently thinks ambushing guests makes for good television. The insult hit its mark. Joy's face went from red to purple, and her voice rose to a near shout. How dare you question my credentials? I've been in this business longer than you've been making movies. And yet, Jackson replied with devastating calm, you still haven't learned the difference between journalism and personal attack. The verbal explosion that followed Joy's outburst was unlike anything viewers had ever witnessed on daytime television. Her voice cracked with indignation as she leaned across the table, pointing her finger directly at Jackson. You arrogant piece of work. You think because you're some big movie star you can come on my show and insult me? Jackson's response was ice cold and measured, which somehow made it even more devastating. Your show? I thought this was The View, not The Joy. Behar Power Trip Hour. And I'm not insulting you. I'm simply responding to your unprofessional behavior with facts. The studio erupted. Audience members were gasping, some pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming television history. Whoopi was frantically gesturing to producers off camera while simultaneously trying to regain control of her show. That's enough. Whoopi shouted over the chaos. Both of you need to take it down several notches right now. But Joy was beyond reason at this point. Her face was now a dangerous shade of red, and her voice had reached a pitch that made everyone in the studio wince. Don't you dare tell me how to do my job. I've been asking tough questions since before this Hollywood prima donna knew what a camera was. Jackson stood up slowly, his full height and commanding presence making everyone in the studio take notice. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades commanding movie sets and boardrooms alike. Prima donna? Joy, the only person having a meltdown on national television right now is you. I came here to promote my film and discuss my career. You turned it into a personal attack because apparently you can't handle being challenged. Sonny Hostin finally found the courage to speak up loudly. Samuel, please sit down. Joy, we need to take a commercial break and reset this conversation. I'm not taking anything anywhere. Joy snapped at her colleague. This man walked onto our set thinking he could lecture us, and I'm not going to sit here and take it. Lecture you. Jackson's voice rose for the first time, his famous intensity finally breaking through his controlled demeanor. I answered your questions politely until you decided to attack my character, question my intelligence, and tell me I should be grateful and quiet. The only person doing any lecturing here is you. Sarah Haynes was now visibly shaking, clearly overwhelmed by the unprecedented hostility unfolding around her. Can we please just stop this? This isn't what our show is about. Your show, Jackson, turned his attention to the entire panel, his voice carrying a mixture of disappointment and disgust. Your show is supposed to be about intelligent discussion and diverse perspectives. Instead, I've been subjected to an ambush by someone who clearly had no intention of having a fair conversation. Alyssa Farah Griffin was frantically shuffling her papers, looking like she wanted to disappear. Samuel, we really do value your perspective, and we're sorry if this got out of hand. But Joy wasn't finished. Her voice had reached a shrieking level that was painful to hear. Out of hand. This man came on our show and insulted everything we stand for. He thinks he's better than us because he's some big-shot actor. Jackson's laugh was bitter and filled with disbelief. Better than you? Joy, I don't think I'm better than anyone. But I do expect to be treated with basic respect when I'm invited somewhere as a guest. Something you clearly don't understand. The situation was rapidly spiraling beyond anyone's control. Whoopi was making desperate hand signals to her production team, while security personnel could be seen moving closer to the set. The audience was in complete shock, many covering their mouths in disbelief at what they were witnessing. Joy, completely consumed by rage, made the fatal mistake that would end the interview. She stood up from her chair, pointing aggressively at Jackson, and shouted at the top of her lungs, "Get this arrogant has been off my set right now. I don't have to sit here and listen to this garbage from some washed-up actor who thinks he's God's gift to Hollywood." The studio fell dead silent. Even the camera operators stopped moving, stunned by the viciousness of Joy's attack. Jackson's expression shifted from anger to something approaching pity as he looked at the woman who had just destroyed her own credibility on live television. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the studio. Washed up has been. Joy, you just showed everyone watching exactly who you really are. Thank you for making that crystal clear. Whoopi was now standing, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had been in show business for decades. That's it. We're going to commercial right now. But the damage was done. Security personnel were already moving toward the set, clearly, having received instructions from the producers. Jackson looked around at the chaos Joy had created and shook his head slowly. You know what? He said, addressing the entire panel but keeping his eyes on Joy. I've been in this business for over 30 years, and I've dealt with difficult people before. but I've never encountered someone so determined to embarrass themselves and their colleagues on national television. Joy, perhaps realizing she had gone too far, tried to backtrack. I didn't mean, you were being so difficult and I got frustrated. Difficult. Jackson's voice carried a note of amazement. Joy, I answered every one of your questions respectfully until you decided to make this personal. The only difficult person in this studio is you. Security was now on the set, and one of the officers approached Jackson respectfully. Sir, we're going to have to ask you to come with us. Jackson looked at the security officer with surprise. I'm being removed? For what? Defending myself against someone who just called me a washed-up has been on live television. Whoopi stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Samuel, I'm so sorry about this. This is not how we wanted this to go. Sorry. Jackson looked around the set one final time, taking in the faces of the other hosts who had watched this disaster unfold. Whoopi, you have nothing to apologize for. You tried to maintain professionalism while your colleague decided to have a public meltdown. As security began to escort Jackson from the set, he turned back to address Joy one final time. His voice was calm, dignified, and devastatingly effective. Joy, I hope when you watch this back, you'll understand that the only person who embarrassed themselves today was you. I came here as a professional, and I'm leaving as a professional. You started this conversation as a talk show host, and you're ending it as someone who just had a tantrum on national television. The final image viewers saw was Samuel L. Jackson walking off the View set with his head held high, his dignity intact, while Joy Behar sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had done. The other hosts looked mortified, the audience sat in shocked silence, and the cameras captured every moment of what would become one of the most talked-about television disasters in recent memory. The credits rolled over a studio, still reeling from the confrontation, with producers scrambling to figure out how to explain what had just happened to their viewers and their network executives. What did you think of this incredible confrontation? Have you ever seen a talk show interview go this wrong? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more unbelievable celebrity moments like this one. Do you think Joy Behar crossed the line, or was Samuel L. Jackson being too sensitive? Let me know what you think.